Hey there, and welcome to the latest episode of the Mind Body Health Podcast. And as always, we're bringing you an episode that's going to be full of hopefully motivation, inspiration, and importantly, with this episode, it's going to be a lot of education. We have stroke rehabilitation expert Ken Monaghan on the call, and this guy is super passionate about this whole area. It's a different kind of area to some of the areas that we have covered, but it's nonetheless really important, especially in a world where we see more and more lifestyle diseases, and this is something that we need to really focus on. And also, big thing you're going to hear on this is the power again of your mind, the psychology, your thought process, that whole area. And that when you're hit with these type of situations, whether it be yourself or it be a loved one or someone you know, that the importance again of a more holistic approach as well as your conventional methods as well. So we're going to be busting a lot of myths. We're going to be sharing a lot of information. And like I said, Ken's a super passionate guy, so make sure you pay attention. And Ken, welcome to the call.
Dave, thanks a million. I really appreciate you allowing me to come on and talk, like, as you say, about what interests me and what my background in rehabilitation and physiotherapy has been about. So I'm looking forward to the chat. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it'd be great because it's a super important topic, and like you said, like lifestyle diseases are on the rise nonstop. It's all the time, and as we said before we came on, actually, we live in a time when there's never been so much information, but unfortunately, the vast majority of that information is absolute rubbish. So this is why I'm always passionate about getting on who I see are heart-led, authentic people who truly add value and actually know what they're talking about. So the listeners can get the actual real information that they then can take and make informed decisions for themselves and their loved ones. And again, when it comes to any form of disease, it's really important to get the right information out there, give people the best chance of living the best lives they can. So what we always start with guests is to kind of find out a bit more about you. It's like, who is Ken? What has taken you to this point? So I want you to go back as far as you want to let people know about who you are, and then all the way up to kind of the present time of why you're doing what you do, and we kind of jump in and out of a few things as well.
Yeah, of course. So I'm almost 55 years of age and I'm from Sligo originally. And I qualified as a physiotherapist, Dave, 32 years ago from University College Dublin. And for the first 16 years of my life as a physiotherapist, I focused on sports medicine and musculoskeletal physiotherapy. I would have worked with a lot of semi-professional teams, and I worked as a private practitioner. And I had worked in America for 4 years, where I really learned a lot of skills. And I loved it, I have to say. But at about 16 years ago, I became familiar with some very innovative therapies that were to do with the brain and how to fix the brain. One of those things was a thing called mirror therapy, and maybe we'll talk about it later.
Sure.
But I became very interested in the whole area of neurology. So for the last 16 years, and especially this coincided with when I moved from Dublin. So when I was focusing on sports medicine, I did a master's degree in sports medicine, and then I went back and did my PhD, where I looked at ankle injuries, and I was using 3D motion analysis to really explore what goes on with people who repeatedly injure their ankles. And I was very fortunate. I got a lecturing job in the School of Physiotherapy in UCD, and I thought that that's where I'd be for the rest of my life. And an unusual incident happened. I went to a Christmas party night. Do you remember the singer Joe Dolan, Dave,
Of
years ago?
course, yeah. Good old Joe Dolan.
And I met my now wife Maria at that concert, and so that I suppose changed direction for us because we decided we weren't going to live in Dublin. We were going to stay in the northwest of Ireland. Maria's from Ballyshannon in County Donegal, and that's where we live now. So for the last 16 years or so, I've been working as a lecturer in what was IT Sligo and is now Atlantic Technological University. And I started to develop a research group there, which focused very much about the brain and treatments for the brain. I called the group the Neuroplasticity Research Group. So neuroplasticity, basically that ability of your brain to change itself and to restructure itself. And we started to develop treatments that led to creation of new medical devices. And I've raised almost 2 million euros for that research group, and I've had 5 PhD students graduate and a number of master's students graduate over the last few years. Um, but I always felt that I suppose I was always working as a physiotherapist with neurology patients during that time, and I probably went to hundreds of houses to patients, and I always heard a very similar message coming to me. And that message was that when patients are discharged home from their rehabilitation center or from their hospitals, at a time when they probably should be looking forward to going home, which most people should do, it's the exact opposite. They actually felt devastated. They feel almost like there's a black cloud over their heads because they felt that, that was their chance of a recovery gone. Um, and of course, the science, which which we become very aware of, the science says the exact opposite. It says that that's nonsense. It says that your home is actually a fantastic place to recover from because of natural benefits that you have there. Um, and also, the other thing is that patients sometimes have heard that they can only recover up until a certain length of time after they've had a stroke. When I was a physio, when I started off 30 years ago, we were told the same thing. We were told that people could recover for 6 to 9 months. And of course, we know now that that's not true. With that patients, your brain has the ability, this neuroplasticity, it has the ability to repair itself and to change its shape and structure based on everything you do and everything you think at every moment in time. So, as I'm watching you here on my screen now, my brain is changing in response to that, and your brain is actually changing as well as you're listening to this story that I'm saying. So, I became very fascinated with some innovative therapies, and I always felt that those therapies could be they could be carried out in people's homes very cost effectively. And so about 4 years ago, I set off I felt that I could write a book that would give caregivers and stroke survivors, give them the guidance that they needed to know what to do once they arrived home, to give them the confidence, I suppose, to know that they can recover when they get home, and give them a prescription or at least a starting off prescription of what kind of therapies could help them. And you see, I suppose I've been very fortunate that around the same time that my book was published last year, um, a lot of the stroke associations have the guidelines that they've come out with has been this insistence that, to recover nowadays from a stroke, the emphasis should be on repetitive practice, repetitively doing simple exercises that help your brain to change itself. And of course, the majority of people's ability to do that would only be in your home environment. So
So
everything I was
they've changed their philosophies and methods kind of in line with that in the last year.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it was
Right.
very fortunate, but
Mm.
great that it agreed with most of the things that we were saying. So I'm coming towards the end of my years as a physiotherapist. I absolutely love working in the college in Sligo. I teach on what are called health science courses. I suppose they're courses that are like stepping stone courses for students to get into physiotherapy and occupational therapy, speech and language therapy. Um, and so I'm very much aware of, I suppose, a lot of the health and fitness guidelines that the World Health Organization would be giving as well. And a lot of that fits with the information that stroke patients should know too. So the
Mm.
last year has been very exciting in one way because a lot of people have gotten my book and read it and have used it successfully to help themselves, help loved ones or family members to recover. And the feedback has been fantastic. And I have to say it's been a great, enjoyable time. And look, thank you to people like yourself who invite me onto shows here that can promote this and get this message out to people because
Yeah.
I think people need that confidence and advice.
Exactly. And again, it's like I said, even just getting the right information out to people and again to give them the hope. And like you said, that where before we've seen if if you were at home within 3, 6 or 9 months, if you haven't got to a certain point, and that's it. So it's like, to get people to actually understand how again the body actually works and the potential that's there. And again, what elements of control that you actually have. And then even just with the home, that it's possible to do it at home. Because it should be the safe space for people. Like it does actually make sense. While it's understanding for people that, to have an element of fear going back home and saying, I don't have that expertise around me. Whereas if I'm in hospital, someone I do, but there has to be a point where they do go home. So I suppose it's a mindset shift and reframing that people need to go through.
Yes, people underestimate the why your home has natural advantages, and I suppose over I suppose at the start of the 16 years ago that I was saying to you that I was became very interested in neurology and the brain. I had been introduced to quite a few popular psychology books. I think the very first one I read was a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers, and it very much talked about the 10,000 hour rule. The idea that if you work really, really hard at anything, really, you can become an expert in that area. And a lot of those books talk about how to be successful in sport and business. But I always felt that those principles could be applied to rehabilitation as well,
Mm.
and as the stroke associations have come out with new guidelines, that seems to be the case. But what I was going to say to you was that um, our home has natural advantages that people underestimate, and one example of those things, there's a professor in Trinity College. He's called Ian, I'm going to look be here now. Ian Robertson, apologies to Ian. Ian is a professor in Trinity College, and Ian wrote a brilliant book called The Winner Effect. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but
No.
one of the things that Ian talks about in that book is that idea that when we're in our home environment, because of the sights, the sounds, the smells, the familiarity, our bodies actually produce extra amounts of testosterone, that hormone that rebuild helps us to rebuild. And we would never know that. We don't know that. But those that those small advantages, that simple advantage is something that can help people to, build better brain cells and to create more neuroplasticity. As well as the fact that, you can have a lot more flexibility when you're on home, your friends and family being around. All of that adds to the more likelihood that you actually are going to feel comfortable and you're going to feel yourself and you're going to be actually maybe less inhibited to do work. So your home has a brilliant natural advantages, and people underestimate that, you see.
Mm.
So it's important to tell people that, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like it's people's sanctuary, especially if people in their elder years and they've been there for up to could be 40, 50 years or more. And that's where even like when a lot of people get to a stage where they maybe even say put into nursing home, a lot of times there can be a huge deterioration like really fast, unless it's something that they personally really welcome. Because
Yes.
obviously there's some situations where it actually ends up being better for them and they enjoy it usually. I know of one or two people like that myself. But also at the same time, I would have heard and know of some people over the years who would have gone from their home environment into nursing home and it's rapid deterioration. So it does
Yes.
make sense again for your home. Again, it is your sanctuary. And even when people come home from holiday, it's something as simple as holidays. We want holidays, we love holidays, but people still like to come back to their home.
We do because we feel comfortable there and we have our
Mm.
routines and we feel very relaxed and less stressed, you see.
Mm.
And of course, you're hugely interested in sport and coaching and things like that. And it explains why when they do the statistics and they look at teams that the results they get when they play in their own home grounds are they're
Yeah,
much better. And they're the same team, but it's the, I suppose it's the support, it's the, as again, it's the sights, the sounds, the smells, it's that confidence that you get.
Familiarity. Yeah,
And
exactly.
and a stroke patient or a stroke survivor or any HRSA patient getting out of hospital and getting back into an environment that you're comfortable with, it relaxes you and you become a little bit, yourself. In fact, one of the things that they've noticed with patients who've had strokes and get back to their homes is that the cognitive kind of emotional side of things that can sometimes be a little bit difficult to diagnose when you're in a rehabilitation center or in an acute hospital, those things can be a little bit easier to diagnose in the home environment because the person is becoming themselves and their
Mm,
family members notice, they see that there's a difference in them than there should be. So there's many advantages with that, and that's really one of the starting things that I would really feel that, God forbid you had a stroke in the morning, Dave, and you were being discharged in a week or two's time. Well, look, I would be thinking that message has to be told to you by somebody that you're home, you're not to fear going home, you're to look forward to it.
yeah.
And you look forward to it for those advantages that we said a second ago.
For
So
sure. I did a quick question there for you. Because like you're super passionate with this whole area, and you're so zoned in and focused and you're doing such great work in it. Was there a particular point or reason or anything where, stroke became such a focal point for you in your career, or did it just kind of happen coincidentally by the types of people you were working with became increasingly just happened to be stroke recovery and stroke rehabilitation, or was it more purposeful you getting into that area?
well, actually, I think there's two things probably directed me towards stroke. The first was I mentioned before that I had discovered a therapy, or I'd heard of a therapy called mirror therapy.
Mm.
Is it okay if I describe to your listeners just
100%,
what?
yeah.
Yeah.
Explain it, yeah.
So mirror therapy wasn't something that was set up to help stroke patients originally. It was actually set up for patients who had lost limbs and who suffered from a thing called phantom limb pain. So
Mm.
again, God forbid you lost your arm or your hand in the morning in an accident, there's going to be almost 100% chance that you're going to suffer from a thing called phantom limb pain. It's your brain gets information from every part of our bodies every moment and every second of every day. And if the brain doesn't get that information from a limb, it finds it strange. It struggles to understand where that's gone. So what it does is it manifests itself as pain. And a lot of patients, they feel like the hand that's gone is still there, and it also feels very painful. So
Mm.
this amazing researcher in India back in the early 90s, Ramachandran, he discovered that he came up with the idea that if you took a very simple mirror and if you sat at a table and you put your two hands or your two arms up on the table and you put the reflective side of the mirror, so you put the mirror vertical where the reflective side was facing your hand that you still have, and the non-reflective side was facing the missing hand. And if you tilted your head and you looked sideways into the reflective side of the mirror, then you would see a reflection of your good hand. But your brain would get fooled in a simple way. Your brain
Mm.
would believe, would see the hand, and it would look as though it was the hand that's missing. And you see, it's the visual information that you get from that goes up to your brain that helps your brain to desensitize those areas and to create new neural pathways. And and it was like a miracle cure. It was it was amazing. For most of those patients, they were cured almost within a few treatments. And of
Amazing.
course, it amazing altogether. And over the years, mirror therapy then was suggested. Could this help stroke patients as well? So a lot of stroke patients who lose the ability to move their hands or their arms, um, mirror therapy was being suggested. And of course, there was some very good research that showed that there was great potential with this. And for some patients, this can be a miracle cure. I suppose over the last few months, over the last few years in our trials in Sligo, we've had quite a few stroke patients come in and use mirror therapy and different therapies. And one patient, PJ Wims, who I suppose he he received a miracle cure, you could say, with mirror therapy, because he had had a stroke, he couldn't move his hand, and 6 months later, when we started doing the therapy with him, within 6 or 7 weeks, he had about 70–80% of his movement back where he'd never had it before. So an example
Mm,
like that is like a miracle cure. And of
mm,
course, we have to be realistic. Not everybody gets that kind of benefit, but mirror therapy is a very simple thing, a very cost-effective thing. I mean, you can buy a mirror for 10 or 15 euros in any of the home savers and places, and you can set it up at a table in your own kitchen, and it's definitely something that is worth trying for patients, of
mm,
course. Um, and so that was the first thing that made me very interested in stroke, was because mirror therapy was something that was being used in it. And then I also had this, I suppose I had this very fortuitous incident that happened soon after I moved to Ballyshannon. I was asked to look, I was asked by the wife of a local general practitioner, doctor, that had had a stroke, to come and see him in his own home. And it was around the time that I was moving. And so it was a very, I suppose it was a fated thing. I was very interested in neurology. I was just moved to Ballyshannon. This man was just after being discharged from hospital. He was very, like an awful lot of patients, he was frustrated. He was, he was, he had ideas on what he should be doing. His family wanted to do everything they could for them, but they felt paralyzed, not being able to give the advice to him. So I came and I started working with Dr. Frank, and that really was a brilliant experience, because we were able to try some of the therapies like mirror therapy that I had been reading about, and we were able to use them in his own home. And I saw firsthand, first of all, the frustration.
mm.
Secondly, everything that his family wanted to do for him, and thirdly, how a lot of these simple therapies could easily be set up in his own home. And if he had somebody there to supervise and to help him, um, the progress that he made was fantastic. So that was a great moment for me, I suppose. And
What period of time is that actually, Ken? Like,
uh,
you went in working with him after what period of time did you notice a quite significant difference?
well, he had just been discharged, possibly a couple of, maybe 2 or 3 months after he'd had a stroke.
Yeah.
And Frank, as was being a medical person himself, he had loads of ideas himself of what he might want to do. But I suppose it was like nobody could give him the green light to go and try these things, because people are people naturally are cautious and afraid, they'll do harm to
Mm,
patients. So he had some great ideas, and actually some of the things he wanted to suggest himself, we tried, and they were very useful. But he loved these things. He loved the mirror therapy. He loved. There was another therapy that I had become very interested in as well. It was a thing called cross education of strengthening. Dave, I don't know if you've ever heard of this before.
mm,
This is a therapy that, let's say, for talk's sake, you go to the gym for 6 weeks and you just strengthen the left side of your body, right? Now, you'd never do that in practice, I know. But let's say you did.
mm,
After 6 weeks, the left side of your body is going to be very, very much stronger because of the exercise you're doing. But amazingly, if you measure the right side of your body, it can be 40–50% stronger, even though you haven't done any exercises. And it's because of the electricity or the neural information that goes between both sides of your brain. And as you can imagine, a therapy like that could have great potential for a stroke patient, because if you can't move one side of your body.
mm,
So what we had been doing in our research group in Sligo was we were combining mirror therapy and that cross education, and we were kind of making new devices. But cross education, the idea of strengthening one side of your body to help a paralyzed side, or a side that can't work, is a very simple principle. And again, a very inexpensive piece of resistance band used in the right way at home can easily allow people to do those things as well. So
that's the exciting thing, Ken does. Like, they're just two therapies. I know there's many others. You talk with a mirror and some bands and just the discipline of being consistent. Because
yes,
obviously, like everything, consistency is the key to any kind of improvement, no matter who you are or what you're talking about. But like, that's all you need. So again, in terms of for people to have hope, there's huge reasons to have hope.
Yeah. Now, look at what I would say to people as well is that when I set out writing the book, there's probably about 30 different therapies that are safe to do and that have some evidence behind them for patients who've had a stroke. So it's not like the therapies that I've chosen in my book are the actual ones everybody should do. And I think this is an important point that your listeners should realize is that it's very important nowadays, and it's very important that patients become actively involved in their therapies if that's at all possible. And what I mean by that is that, you know, what of those 30 therapies, if you tried some of those, Dave, after having a stroke yourself, some of those will naturally, instinctively, you'll say to yourself, I feel that's doing something for me, or I feel that's not doing something for me. And it would be the same with me, or it would be the same with 100 different stroke patients. Everybody has therapy. You know, some of the therapies work brilliantly for some people and others don't. Again, depending sometimes on the cognitive issues that are going on.
Mm.
Actually,
Yeah.
one thing happened with Dr. Frank that was a very good life lesson for me. Around the time that I was treating him, and this is a good few years ago now, but do you remember when the Wii
Oh yeah.
came out where you were playing games on television and
Yeah.
there was a little balance board with the Wii and you played, you kind of shifted your weight and you got the golf ball or something to get a ball into a hole in golf. And I'd read some research that this was working for stroke patients, and um, we had sourced one of these boards that I thought might help Frank. And it was difficult because there weren't that many of them around. And I really, really, really looked forward to the day when we got it in and we were getting Frank to use it. And I always remember we got it into his house and with some help, we got him to stand up and on the board. And immediately he hated it. He hated it with a passion. It was just obvious.
Mm.
He couldn't grasp the concept of it. So after me looking forward to him using it and thinking this is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread for him, it wasn't.
Yeah. It
And it
wasn't the
was
right one for him.
no, and it was the perfect example that patients need to try different therapies, safe therapies, therapies that have evidence behind them, um, and decide which ones that work best for them. Because if they do that, it's more likely they'll get success, and also it's more likely that they'll have the motivation to keep doing those for longer. You know, the repetitive stuff that needs to be done.
Yeah.
However, I had to start off with a prescription that I felt could at least get people going. And for that reason, I chose 5 different therapies that I think are fundamentally very important. And they involve simple things like stretching exercises, walking, and we can talk about walking, how important that is.
Yeah.
The mirror therapy, obviously, the sensory substitute or the cross education idea with the band. And then there was another very unusual therapy that I'd come across as well. It's called sensory substitution. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, Dave.
No.
Um, but uh, Actually, for your listeners and yourself, if you're interested in the brain and unusual therapies that can help the brain and people recover from different neurology conditions, there's an absolute guru out there called Norman Doidge. And Norman has written 2 fantastic books. The very first one is called The Brain That Changes Itself. And the second one, I think, is The Healing Brain of such. And each of his chapters talks about very unusual therapies, very innovative things that are being used around the world to try and help neurology conditions. But there's a very, very, very interesting chapter in it in the first book, and it concerned pregnant women who, after they had their babies, if they needed to be put on an antibiotic, and at the time an antibiotic called gentamicin was prescribed to people very frequently. What they didn't know at the time was that if you stayed on gentamicin for too long, it actually destroyed your vestibular apparatus, this mechanism for controlling your balance in your ears. So these women became known as wobblers because their lives were destroyed. They literally couldn't control their balance. And, as you can imagine, they weren't able to function in society so well. So this amazing researcher in America, Paul Bacurita, he had this idea that if your brain has lost one sense for some reason, in this case because of being on the medicine so long, could we substitute other information up to the brain and replace it? And so what he figured out was that he got like a Bob the Builder helmet that he put on one of these
Mm.
patients with some little wires that were attached to almost like a piece of chewing gum. You remember Wrigley's chewing gum, the little
Yeah,
piece of plastic?
yeah.
And they had little sensors on it that was placed on the tongue because apparently your tongue is very, very sensitive in terms of recognizing different patterns on it. And when the patients would rotate their heads side to side, a certain set of the sensors would be activated and they'd feel that. When the head would go forwards and backwards, a different set of sensors would be activated. And when the head would go side to side, a different set. And almost instantly, the brain was able to figure out how to use this extra information to make up for the fact that the balance information was not working, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah.
And they termed this, they call it sensory substitution. And of course, I don't know, do you wear glasses, Dave? Do you?
As a kid, I did. I got laser surgery, so I haven't worn them since.
Well, if for anybody who sees me, I'm wearing what's called varifocal glasses, and those glasses have three different lenses in them. So there's the one for reading in the bottom, the middle for television, and the other for driving. And the idea is that I don't have to keep taking them on and off now.
Mm.
But when I got those at the start, I swear I really genuinely thought the optician had done a bad job. I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
I couldn't figure them out. They wouldn't work.
yeah.
And after about a couple of days, it was like a switch moment and everything was perfect. And I know now why that is that for me to look through the bottom ones when I'm reading, my head has to tilt very, very slightly, if it makes sense, to a certain degree. To look at television, it has to tilt a different place. To look
Mm.
for driving, it has to tilt. And it takes the brain a little bit of time to figure those things out. But once it figures it out, it's perfect. It
Yeah,
works brilliantly. So the idea of sensory substitution, we can do those things with very simple weighing scales as well. And people can learn to take weight if
mm.
in that same fashion as well. There's a little bit of biofeedback kind of sensory substitution as well. So that's a third therapy that we talk about here and something we've done a lot of research in our research group on as well. But the principle, as I was saying to you, is that there's no one golden therapy that's out there. Everybody looks for it, but
Yeah,
it doesn't exist. It doesn't
yeah.
exist. But there are about 30 different therapies that are safe to do and have evidence behind them. And the more that patients who've had strokes try different therapies and sense which ones work for them, the more likely they are to do them for the length of time they need. And you see, this is a very important point as well.
Very important because like that, people, it's like with everything, they're looking for the magic bullet. And then sometimes certain things are marketed or portrayed or given as the magic bullet. When, as you said, there's like up to 30 therapies. And the thing is, there's no one size fits all. And then it's like in with Frank, it was a case of, what suited that person. And one therapy that was great for one didn't suit him. And then the one that worked for him maybe didn't work for that other person or somebody else. So you need to match the right thing with the right person. But then on top of that, there has to be consistency and you have to
Yes.
put in the work. And like we spoke before about, hard work and you need to put in the hard work, you need to put in 10,000 hours. You need to show the desire you want to have to change because otherwise how can change happen?
Yeah.
So, but there's so much hope there in terms of, especially the types of therapies you're saying there. Again, they're all possible for each person. It's just a case of which one will work best or which one will a person connect best with. That's where again there's so much hope in what you're saying here.
Yes, and we before we started this interview, we were chatting, and I mentioned to you that idea that everybody's looking for the perfect therapy, the one
Mm.
therapy that's going to get them better, and unfortunately, there is no such thing. Um, and one of the big problems in life for all of us is that when you're searching, if you've had a stroke in the morning time, you are naturally going to be looking on the internet and you're going to be looking for people who have had miraculous recoveries. And there's nothing wrong with that. I understand why people do that. But unfortunately, and usually, and if you go on the internet, you will find handfuls of people that have had miraculous recoveries from strokes and you'll be looking to see what did they do, what therapies did they do, and you'll look to replicate those things. But a very important point for your listeners, and again for people who are recovering after a stroke, is to realize that for every one person who has a miraculous recovery where they recover within a few weeks, there will be 1,000 patients whose recovery will be actually very slow and gradual, and they need to do it over the course of a few months because that's the normal pattern. But we don't see those things highlighted so much on the internet. We see the miraculous ones. So if you've just had a stroke and if you haven't had a miraculous recovery and you go comparing yourself to these miraculous people, then naturally you're going to feel very defeated. You're going to feel very disappointed. And that's going to affect your motivation to keep going. So just
Yeah.
people really should realize that this in psychology, I think they call it survivorship bias. We see the survivors only. We don't realize the people that didn't do so well. But
Mm.
the normal routine is of people that don't get this immediate therapy thing. And the
Yeah.
second thing that you mentioned there, which is fascinating, and I always thought it was a brilliant message, and it's something that we should teach our kids, to be honest with you, is the idea of what you call the 10,000 hour rule. And the 10,000 hour rule was mentioned by a man called Malcolm Gladwell in one of his books called Outliers. And that principle it came from Swedish researchers who went to a very famous violin school, and they looked at how much practice had all the violin people done since they started playing violin. And what they found was that the people who had done 6 to 8 thousand hours of meaningful practice with the violin, they became, music teachers and they were involved in music, but they didn't reach the highest heights
Mm.
of the violin world. People who practiced on 8 to 10 thousand hours, they maybe got into symphonies, international symphonies, which was a fantastic achievement, but they weren't the ultimate creme de la creme. But the 10,000 hour plus practice, that was the people who became the soloists and they became the top. And so this 10,000 hour rule principle became to be talked about. And I suppose it's a lesson, it's a lesson for a lot of children to hear is that to be successful in life, it's not the most talented people that become the most successful. It's the hardest workers that become the most successful. And that's true to pretty much every area of life. However, if you do that amount of practice, that 10,000 hours of meaningful practice, well, you apparently give yourself a chance of being an expert in any area of life within reason. Yeah, I guess if you're 5'2", you're going to struggle to be an NBA basketball player. But at the same time, within reason, that principle that, the hardest workers get to they achieve the most. And
Yeah.
that's a lesson that students and young people need to hear, because a lot of people still think that, unless you're very talented at an early age, you're not going to be successful in certain areas. And that's not true. A
Yeah.
little talent certainly gives you a starting point. I'm sure this is something that you talk a lot about.
Yeah.
But overall hard work and meaningful practice, that's really what brings people to the very top.
Yeah, like hard work is what pays off, and it ties into things like you're saying, with the stroke victims and rehabilitation and whatever therapy they do, or anyone achieving anything like the 10,000 hours and so on. It's about having patience. Like you have to be patient, and that's where most people fall down because they are looking for that magic bullet. And unfortunately, we live in a world where it's all about looking for the magic bullet, and online is all about the magic bullets that are out there. But there is no magic bullet. It's about find something that works for you that you will do consistently and that you will have patience with until you get to the point where it's like a turning point where you start to really actually feel that there's an impact happening. Then you've got a bit of momentum. And then I call it like the snowball effect, like a snowball going down the hill. It eventually gets unstoppable because once you just keep consistent, keep going, you amass more and more benefit. And then it just becomes inevitable to get to success, but you have to believe. Whereas at the start, it's about hope. It kind of switches from hope to belief over time in an increasing degree. But if you're not patient and consistent, that can't happen. And that applies to every aspect of life as much as for stroke rehabilitation.
It does. And so you were talking there about belief, and is it okay if I tell a very simple story to your listeners?
Of course, Ken, yeah.
Um, uh, there's a brilliant psychologist in America called Alia Crum in Stanford University, and she did this brilliant experiment with milkshakes one time. So on one occasion, she took a group of students and she made a specially designed milkshake, and she told them that it was so high in calories, so high that they wouldn't probably need another meal for the rest of the day. And then 2 days later, she took the same students and she gave them a specially designed milkshake. And this time she told them that it was so low in calories, so low in fact, that they'd probably need 2 or 3 meals for the rest of the day. And as you can imagine, it was the same milkshake that they were getting.
Yeah,
But what they were measuring was how much of a hunger hormone that those people, those students created in their bodies for the rest of the day after they took what they understood to be a high or a low calorie milkshake. And of course, what they found was astonishing. It was astonishing and fascinating was that the students who, when they believed they were taking a high calorie milkshake, their bodies produced only 1/3 of the amount of hunger hormone for the rest of the day than when they believed it was a low calorie one. And you see, that that is astonishing for one reason. The reason is that the only really logical explanation for that is that their brains basically created something physiologically in their bodies based on what they thought or what they believed. Isn't that correct?
totally,
And
yeah.
and you see, this is such an important message for everybody, not just stroke patients, but when we believe positive things are going to happen to us. Our brains, which act like pharmacies, they actually do create, positive growth hormones, positive hormones, positive chemicals, positive growth factors in our bodies to kind of create an environment that gives us an advantage for that to happen. And the opposite is also true as well. If we believe that negative things are going to happen to us, the nocebo effect that people talk about. So the positive effect is this placebo effect. Then our brains do the same thing. It creates negative environment, negative hormones, negative chemicals. And and you see, there's a fantastic book as well, and I hope you don't mind me keep mentioning books, but
No, far away.
if your readers are interested in this whole area, there's a brilliant book called The Expectation Effect by a man called David Robson. And it has, brilliant stories that, backs up what we've just said there, that, how important your belief systems are. And you see, what I have learned, I suppose, over my 30 years as a physiotherapist is that it's so important when I treat patients. It's so important how I talk to them, how I explain to them how therapies work, how I, present therapies to them, not just the actual therapies that they're doing. It's more about the mindset and how I can have them, understanding how this is going to work and have them what we call, priming them, I suppose is the term for it. So
Mm.
we prime people. And you see, I think we've always known that, a doctor or a therapist that sits with you for 5 or 10 minutes and explains to you very well why a therapy should work or why a new medicine should work for you. Uh, Patients tend to do much better if they do that, as opposed to somebody who just hands you a medicine or just said, well, here's your exercises, go off and do them.
Mm.
And you see that explanation and that kind of talking out why something should work, that's enhancing the placebo effect of the therapy that you're giving people. And I would say that over the next 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to see a lot more of this priming and, we're going to see medical professionals enhance the therapies that they already give by explaining this to patients and maybe saying to you, Dave, look, you're going to be on a new drug, say a blood pressure tablet, but before you take it, I'm insisting that you have to watch a little video that explains everything about it and explains why it should work for you and why it'll work and what's doing in your body before you take it. So it's not
Mm.
we're not we're not trying to substitute your blood pressure tablet for some alternative therapy or anything like that. We're doing is we're just enhancing the benefit that you should get from it by explaining it more and using
Mm.
that placebo effect to our advantage, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
so with stroke patients and any patient, it's hugely important that the beliefs, they have a positive attitude and a kind of an expectation that they have the ability to improve. Because if they don't, I suppose really it doesn't matter what therapies you give them, it's probably not going to be beneficial, or it's certainly not going to be as beneficial as
Yeah,
if they believe.
100%. 100%. It's like I say, even with things like hypnotherapy and stuff, or smokers, like a smoker, if they really don't want to themselves give up to smoking, doesn't matter how many books they read, how many gums they chew, how many hypnotherapists they go to, it's not going to really happen. Like they have to really want it. So, it's like same stroke rehabilitation. You have to want it enough, one, but you also have to believe in the process and you have to be, again, committed to the consistency. And like it's like all you've said just there for the last few minutes, which is like so interesting. It's such an important message for people to get. Like the bottom line, like I always say, is the mind is a control tower. And you are literally talking to yourselves every second of every day. And if you're talking in terms of energetically, emotionally, what you're listening to, what you're saying, what you're thinking, people around you, energy around you, if it's predominantly negative, that's a big negative message to yourselves. If it's largely positive, it's a positive message to yourselves. Because even take a stroke victim who goes home and the people around them are incredibly positive and encouraging and supportive, and then the person is invested in I'm going to make this work. I'm going to do this therapy, whichever therapy it is, and they're committed to consistency. Like the chances of rapid improvement are significant. Versus if it's, oh, you've had a stroke, oh, you're going to be like this forever. And it's a very negative energy around them, as well as the person in their own head feels the exact same way. They then, even though they kind of, obviously they have the desire to improve, but they kind of don't really believe they can improve. They're probably not going to be consistent then with the therapy, even with the most encouragement possible around them. And then that's going to be a very different situation. So again, your mind is so important, and not just with stroke, with everything in life, like literally everything. You're speaking to yourselves, and you have to be very conscious of the way you are speaking to yourselves every single day. And that's not just again you; that's everything around you and everyone around you.
It is, and you see, again, in psychology, the term for this they call it confirmation bias.
Mm.
And I suppose it's, I often say this when I'm doing talks to audiences. I'll say to them, do you think that when two people listening to me talking for an hour, if they were interviewed outside by a local radio station independently, do you think that both of those people would say the exact same message that I had said for the last hour? And the answer is no, they wouldn't, because people our brains will take in messages that agree with what we believe. Isn't that right? This is what they
100%,
call
yeah.
confirmation. And this is the awful thing, is that we hear information every day that's throwing at us, and our brains will actually ignore stuff that doesn't agree with what we believe ourselves. But we don't know that happens. The only time we know it happens is when we have decision making to do, and that's when our subconscious comes out. So this idea, this belief system, and it sounds, I suppose, years ago, people didn't mention it so much because it sounded almost a little bit airy-fairy. It's like it's kind of like a dirty word to be talking about placebo effects and belief systems. But
Mm.
but our brain and what we believe in and our subconscious really does affect so much of how we behave and how we turn out in life. Um, and I suppose that's where caregivers and family members are so important, and why the home environment, as you just said earlier, is so important, is that people who are all the time with positive messages, So if I'm, you've just had a stroke, Dave, and I'm your brother, and I'm at home, and I'm trying to encourage you, and because I know what I should be encouraging, I'm all the time kind of saying positive little prompts to you. I'm saying, Dave, your brain really can improve. Your brain can change itself at any stage of your life, no matter what you do. You know what? I was reading there today that, being in your own home is a brilliant place to be able to do your rehabilitation. Uh, you know, Caregivers, family members are fantastic at being able to help help you to recover. These are the kind of messages that you need to be hearing all the
Mm.
time, and subconsciously they help you an awful lot. But we don't place as much value on those things as we possibly should do, I suppose. And we're going to learn a little bit more about this over as years go by. I said earlier to you before we recorded this that another huge change I see happening in medicine is that um, there's more of a merging, I would feel, of kind of Eastern medicine and Western medicine over the last 20 years than there was when I qualified 30 years ago. I think there was two different Eastern medicine very much takes a holistic approach, and your whole body and your mind is so part of that. Western medicine, very little bit more that, we treat your shoulders if it was one entity. And I
Yeah,
think
directly. Yeah.
I think there's a merging of both of those two things.
There's more
Um,
openness and awareness for sure now in the last, whatever, I suppose, yeah, 10, 20 years. People are becoming more open and there's more awareness and acceptance of this is a legitimate angle to take and look at.
yeah. And then the other look at the other thing that we didn't mention is that a lot of the stroke associations internationally now are saying that for a person to recover after a stroke and give themselves the best chance and opportunity, they need to aim to do 2 to 3 hours of therapy every day, if they can tolerate it, of different therapies that, they feel helps them. And of course, there's two problems with this. One is that um, it can become mind-numbingly boring to do exercises for 2 to 3 hours every day, as we can imagine. So a variety of different therapies is a very good idea with lots of rest in between times. And you see, how you motivate people to keep doing that is also another big factor in life and in stroke rehabilitation as well. Have I time to tell you one more very quick story?
You do, far away. Yeah.
Right. Another brilliant psychologist in America, in Duke University this time, he wrote a brilliant book called Predictably Irrational. And in it, he talks about what he calls the Lego story. So we've all played with Lego, isn't that right, as a child?
Yeah.
And what he was trying to find is there are little Lego sets called Bionicles. That if I gave you, Dave, it might take you about 10 or 15 minutes to make. But what he wanted to find out was if I paid you to make that, so let's say I hand you a little Lego set, it takes you 10 or 15 minutes to make it, and I pay you €10 to do it. And then when you've it done, if I give you another set, and this time I hand you €9 50 cents, and then if you do a third one, I give you €9 and 8.50 and eight. He wanted to see how long would you keep going making them before you decided that it wasn't worth your while, right? Which is a good question, which is a good question to ask.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But of course, there was a twist with the experiment. One group of people, when they come up with their first set made, so let's say you come up with your first set made and you hand it to me and I'm the researcher. When I look at your set made, I look at it, I smile at you, and I give you good body language feedback. I record it on the page. I acknowledge that you've done it. I praise you. I say, Dave, that's brilliant. You did brilliantly there. You could do loads of these. I encourage you. I say, God, you could keep going at this forever. And more importantly, I take the piece that you've made and I put it on the shelf behind me so that when you're doing the next one, you can see it. You can
Mm.
see a record of what you've done. Now, in the other group, when the person brings up the first piece they've made and the researcher looks at it, absolutely nothing. No encouragement, no smile, no body language,
No
no
feedback
record,
at all. Like,
nothing, no acknowledgement, no praise, nothing, no looking. In fact, rather than putting on the shelf, he breaks it up in front of the person and he puts it in the Lego bin under the table, right? Now he gives you the next set and he pays you the money and away you go. And as you can imagine, this the group that got the praise, so they got the recognition, the encouragement, the acknowledgement, the praise, or what I call reap. They did almost twice as many sets as the group on the other side. And you
Mm.
see, that message is very important for every aspect of life. And, I'm sure we all know it from our work and our, if we get a pat on the back, if somebody were, your manager says to you, God, you're doing a good job. I heard what you did yesterday. You did very well. Then, then that encourages and it motivates us. And stroke patients and people who are recovering are no different. If
Yeah.
there's somebody at home who's, you know, writing down every exercise you've done, how many repetitions, and you were able to say, well, look at yesterday you did 5 repetitions of this thing. Today you're doing it 7 or 8, and that isn't that encouragement? That's better, or I know you're really working hard, and praising and encouraging and doing all of this. And these are the qualities that a caregiver or a family member can really bring to the table that are very, very, very underestimated. You see, but it really helps people to motivate them to keep going, especially if you have to do lots and lots of repetitions of exercises. And these are the small little things that make a big difference. So,
Hugely, yeah.
and then the final thing that's very important is if you can prove to people that they're making progress, that also helps hugely as well. And the problem with stroke patients, and it's a lot in life, is that if you only make very small improvements over a period of time, it's very, very difficult to see that. So, my analogy here is it's a bit like our kids, unless you have a son, you were saying earlier on, I'm sure when they were small, you did the little thing on the wall where you measure
The
their
height.
height.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
And, your granny comes in and they say, "Oh my God, James got so tall, or such and such got tall," and you're kind of going, "Did they?" And
yeah,
yeah, because they've gotten tall very slowly in front of you, but every
yeah,
time you put them on the
yeah.
wall and
It's
you
up.
measure them, you see
Yeah,
the difference. And it's
yeah.
the same with stroke patients. If a patient can only move their arm to here, and then a week later they move it just slightly further, it's very difficult for them to see that progress. So.
Yeah.
What I've described in one of the chapters in the book are some very, very simple techniques where you can use measuring tapes. You can use very simple things to prove to people that they're making a little bit of progress. Because if you prove it to them, that is a fantastic motivation as well. So
Totally.
I suppose combining all of those small things together is kind of the package that helps people to, hopefully, have that encouragement and have that guidance that they need. But fundamentally behind it all is the neuroplasticity idea that, your brain can change at every moment in time. And that relates to sport as well as it relates to stroke rehabilitation. I'm sure you use that, those analogies when you're with your coach, when you're doing coaching and your own business as well.
100%. Yeah, yeah.
And people have to realize that it's not even physical activity that changes your brain structure. So it's not me moving my hands and doing. If I visualize or if I mentally practice things, my brain changes just the same. Isn't that right?
Mm.
Um,
It's like
uh,
visualizing lifting weights and not even lifting weights, and the person's strength of the muscle has actually increased. They haven't even lifted the weight. So,
yes,
there's lots of studies have been done like this, which shows again the power of the mind, which is what's exciting for us because most people barely use the power of the mind at all, like fractionally. To even increase it by a couple of percent, it's unbelievable what we could achieve.
it is. There was a great experiment a few years ago as well, done on a group of people. And what they had done was the researchers had taken a group, divided them into two, and none of them were able to play a piano. But what they were showing them, so the first group was showing a very simple set of, on a keyboard, they were showing a pattern of music. And for the week after they were shown it, they were given a keyboard and they were to practice at home and come back. And then the other group were shown the pattern as well, but for the week afterwards, they weren't given a keyboard at all. They had to visually imagine that they were doing it and they were doing it in their head, so they were mentally practicing.
Hmm.
And when they came back afterwards, the group that had done the visualization, they weren't as good as the people who had actually practiced it, but they were very close. It was
Yeah,
it was astonishing,
yeah,
in fact. So we know now that, when we mentally practice, and I know place kickers do this, golfers do this a lot, isn't that right?
yeah.
We hope
Visualization and so on. Yeah, it's so powerful.
it is. And when patients can't move their fingers and their hands and things, a very good starting point is also visualization as well, to try and get, I suppose, to excite the brain a little bit and get that
Yeah.
neuroplasticity possibilities
And
heightened.
again, that's where the excitement is. Like, even I know of people who've been in like serious accidents where they've been told you won't walk again, and they've become pretty much full able-bodied again. But it all started that way. They visualized themselves non-stop being able to do it. And then once they could do a little bit, it gave them a bit more hope to do a bit more. And they kept visualizing, kept moving, and now walking, pretty much moving normally. When originally were told you won't ever walk again. So, this is the thing that's exciting for us, that, to realize just how powerful our brain is. And it's like I said, even to talk to the cells, and like you've said about the people around you and that positive reinforcement versus the alternative. Like, it's so important. And it's like whenever I have clients or people I know who might, let's say, it could be a parent gets ill, or they come home from hospital, or they've got a disease. I always stress to them, look, no matter how you're feeling, you most likely going to be worried, upset, stressed, anxious, all of that. It's so important when you're around that person, you keep that to yourself, and you basically create a good positive environment around them so that they feel only positivity. Whatever happens when you leave that room is another story, but you need to not relay that onto them, because they're going to feel it. And then that obviously is going to be part of them, and that's how they're going to talk to themselves. So, it's just people need to realize again the power. And I think hopefully, as you've said, you see the Eastern philosophies coming more and more over into the West, and hopefully they will, because that will definitely awaken people's consciousness to the power of subconscious and all the different holistic methods and visualization and the power of the mind and everything else. And, it's like that marrying with some of the highly beneficial aspects of the Western world. That'll be a magic combination.
Yeah, it's look at so I'm always saying to people that I love that expression, if you I think it's the Henry Ford quote, if you think you can or you
Mm.
think you can't, then usually you're correct.
Yeah. Mm.
And it's very true. But I suppose the other thing too, I just want to say before we finish as well, is that I'm not here saying to your listeners that every patient, every person who had a stroke 10 years ago or 15 years ago, just because they read my book and read these concepts, have the capability of changing themselves at that moment in time, because our tissues are very much like plasticine. Our tissues are, viscoelastic materials. If you haven't moved your hand for 3 years, you haven't stretched, even for a couple of weeks, even for a month or two, if you haven't
Mm.
stretched tissues, if you haven't kept the range of motion in your tissues, uh, and the tissues have become rigid over the course of months and of years, well, it doesn't matter how much electricity you send to those limbs at that point in time. Your capability of actually getting movement is probably not going to be possible, because you're, that time period, that important period,
Mm.
has elapsed. So I suppose for a lot of people who have no movement and have no ability to move their limbs, it's very important. That's where a caregiver, a family member helps to keep the tissues viable and keep the
Yeah.
stretching, keep the flexibility. It's the same in athletes as well. If you
Totally.
can keep your flexibility, but you've got to do regular stretching and you've got to keep those
Yeah.
tissues. And there's nothing too neuroplastic about that. That's just a case of physically just stretching out tissues and keeping them viable, in the hopes, I suppose, that the electricity and the messages that come from the brain will improve themselves with time. So, if you're listening to this and you've had a stroke 20 years ago and you have a completely rigid arm, well, that it's highly unlikely that that is going to change after 20 years of time.
Mm. So
So I
long.
suppose
Yeah.
so I suppose it's for people that are very much having their strokes now or in the recent past, that a lot of the good the advice that I'm saying is going to be very relevant for, if that makes sense.
Mm.
However, your brain is your brain can change itself at any moment in time. We know that. That's a fact, and it's not
Mm.
something that we're making up. So you can still get some recovery of some of your, your be it a cognitive, emotional, kind of physical benefit years later after a stroke. But the idea that you might get a full recovery and be back to normal is probably impractical, to say the least. So
Yeah.
you have to have some limits
Makes
on it,
sense.
if that makes sense.
Course, makes total sense. Well, Ken, that's been incredible information you shared, and the big word again, I think, is going to be hope for people that there is, and with some very simple practices, just again consistency, patience. That's going to be the key for people, and that positive reinforcement from whoever surrounds you. So again, that's always important in life in general, but obviously with stroke rehab, it's even more important. So where can people find out more about you, or what's the name of the book, and where can they get it? And I'll have all the links and stuff in the show notes anyway.
Yeah, so the book is called Lights, Mirrors, Action. You'll have the show notes, so whatever. This is just a copy of it here.
Yeah,
It's a guide, so it's Lights, Mirrors, Action, a guide to transforming the lives of caregivers and stroke survivors. It's written genuinely in a very easy to understand fashion. It was written for non-medical people to read, but it has about 140 footnotes of science there that if you want to investigate, there's plenty behind it. The book is available on all Amazon sites. It's available in a lot of the local bookstores where I live in the Northwest. It's soon, I'm hoping, to be available in all libraries around the country. And my email address where people can contact me, and really and truly, I was saying to you earlier, I actually want to get this book into the hands of as many people as possible. So if people email me, my email address is Kenneth, Kenneth, dot my surname Monaghan, Monaghan, at atu.ie. If they email me and if they genuinely want a copy of it, I'll send them a copy, a PDF copy of the book. I'll have no problems because I want as many people to benefit from it. As I said to you at the start of the show, the reason for writing it is that I just feel it's people need guidance, confidence, motivation to be able to help themselves recover, and I think some of the advice in here can help them to do that. And I want as many people to get it as possible, and I'm happy to give that out to people if they contact me. Is that okay?
fantastic. And look, it's clear, Ken, that you're very passionate about this, and this is a purpose for you. And you've added so much value. You've added a lot of clarity. You've given a lot of education. You've busted a lot of important myths. And again, like I've said again a few times, you've given a lot of hope to people as well in what you share. And you're making an impact on so many people, knowing and not knowing, like we spoke about before we came on. And it's just to keep up the good work, keep it going. And like for you guys listening, I'm sure you got a lot from it. And whether it be something that's going to be applicable now or in the future for you or a loved one, I'm sure it's going to come in useful, this information, and share it with other people anyway. Like everyone has been touched in some way by someone in terms of stroke, whether it be directly or family or friends or family of friends or somebody. So it's important we help Ken to get his message out there and get the real information out there. And like I said a while ago, there's so much information out there these days, but most of it is not accurate or true. And we need to get the real information out there to people. And Ken, I just want to thank you for all the great work that you're doing, firstly, because again, we need more and more people out there having a positive impact who are truly heart-led and authentic and want to truly make an impact. And I want to thank you as well for your, giving up so much of your precious time to even be on the show, because it's another very, very valuable episode. And again, for me, it's all again about having people on who add value and are authentic.
Yeah, Dave, look at thank you. You're the one I should be thanking because I've listened to a lot of your shows. I have to say, you're a very positive guy yourself, and the message that you always bring out is very much a lot of what I've just spoken about in terms of my stroke patients. So you're somebody that I think we think very similar. Um, Life, it's simple things done well in life make a big difference. And one thing I just forgot to say when you were saying where people can contact me, I tend to use LinkedIn as my social platform of choice. And every week I post a newsletter, and every day I post some useful information that backs up everything that's in the book. So if people connect with me on LinkedIn, that's a really valuable resource, and it's somewhere that they'll definitely be able to make contact with me. Is that okay?
Brilliant, yeah.
And can I wish you the best of luck because your podcast is going from strength to strength, and I hope you continue doing what you're doing as well. It's hugely valuable too.
Well, thank you, Ken, and you'll be a big part of that growth as well and contribute with this valuable episode. And I'll put a link, as I said, to all the different things for the show notes and the email, LinkedIn, everything that you guys need. And if you have questions, you can always contact me. So that's been another awesome episode of the Mind Body Health podcast. I'm sure you got a lot from it. Like I said, please share it out there. Also, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and follow. Make sure you answer the question at the end of the podcast. If you happen to watch this on Spotify or engage in the poll, remember, I can only get this message out to people, as so many people. It's you, by sharing out there, can help more people that I can't get to. So if you know of anyone who this episode would help, please do share it out there. And I look forward to speak to you on the next episode of the Mind Body Health podcast.